Close your eyes for a second and listen. You hear the clinking of glass milk bottles, the crinkle of stiff brown paper bags, and the heavy mechanical ka-chunk of cash register keys. But there is one sound completely missing. The beep. That relentless electronic screech of a barcode scanner is nowhere to be found because it's 1960 and you have just stepped into a grocery store where the rules of the game are completely different. In this world, there are no lasers, no self-checkouts, and absolutely no computers to save you. Instead, you are looking at a system built entirely on smudged purple ink stamps, lightning-fast fingers, and something we seem to have lost today: blind trust. Imagine a checkout line where the cashier had to physically read the price stamped on every single can of soup and manually punch it into a machine, all while memorizing the fluctuating cost of produce by heart. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, yet somehow it was the golden age of the American supermarket. But here is the real question. Without digital tracking, how did they stop people from just walking out with the inventory? The answer involves a clever psychological trick that stores used in the 60s, a secret method we are going to break down. If you want to receive more stories like this one that uncover the hidden history of everyday life, please leave a like and subscribe. Now, grab a cart, because we need to talk about why shopping in 1960 was actually more difficult and more exciting than you ever imagined. Step onto the black rubber mat that triggers the pneumatic hiss of the automatic door, a sound that, in 1960, still feels like a minor miracle of the modern age. As the aluminum-framed glass slides open, you aren't just entering a building, you are entering the cathedral of American abundance. The air inside is different here, cooler, conditioned to a crisp chill that preserves the produce and keeps the ladies in their coats comfortable. The smell is a distinct cocktail of floor wax, ground coffee beans, and the faint, sterile scent of ozone from the humming fluorescent lights overhead. This is the supermarket of the space age, a place where the chaotic sawdust-covered floors of the old general store have been replaced by gleaming linoleum tiles, polished to a mirror shine that reflects the endless rows of colorful boxes. To truly understand this world, you have to look at the people walking the aisles. Shopping in 1960 isn't a chore you do in pajama bottoms and a hoodie. It is a public appearance. You see women pushing carts who look like they are ready for a luncheon at the country club. Their hair is perfectly coiffed, perhaps protected by a sheer chiffon scarf, and they are wearing dresses cinched at the waist, often accompanied by low heels that click rhythmically against the hard floor. Some even wear white gloves, a holdover from a more formal time, gripping the handle of a shopping cart that is a far cry from the plastic and aluminum hybrids we drive today. These carts are heavy, industrial beasts made of chrome-plated steel wire, rattling with a metallic clatter that fills the store. They don't have built-in cup holders or smartphone docks. They are utilitarian cages designed for one thing: volume. And as you grab one of these cold metal handles, you realize that the cart is the vessel for the new American dream, a basket waiting to be filled with the wonders of industrial food science. But before you put a single item in that cart, you have to understand the chaos of the shelves. Today, you look at a shelf edge for a digital tag or a printed barcode, but in 1960, the price is physically on the object itself, and getting it there is a labor-intensive nightmare that defines the era. Every single can of Campbell's soup, every box of Ritz crackers, and every jar of Gerber baby food has been touched by a human hand before you ever arrived. This is the era of the Garvey price marker and the grease pencil. Imagine a stock boy in a white apron standing in the aisle with a case of beans. He has to cut the top off the cardboard case, dip his adjustable rubber stamper into a tin of purple, solvent-heavy ink, and rhythmically hammer the top of every single can. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It is a mesmerizing, repetitive percussion that provides the soundtrack to the grocery experience. The problem, of course, is that ink smudges. It fades. Sometimes the stamper is set wrong, or the stock boy's hand slips, and suddenly a can of peaches costs 3 cents instead of 30. This system relies entirely on the visual acuity of the cashier at the front. But for you, the shopper, it creates a tactile connection to the price. You pick up a box of detergent and you feel the indentation of the stamp. You get a little purple ink on your thumb. The price isn't some abstract data point floating in a computer server. It is a physical layer of paint on the product itself. And if the price changes, there are no instant updates. A manager has to come out with a bottle of solvent, wipe the old price off, and stamp a new one, or slap a sticky label over the old price, creating a geological layering of inflation that you can peel back with your fingernail. As you navigate deeper into the aisles, you're surrounded by the explosion of mid-century packaging design. This is the Mad Men era of advertising, where bright, saturated primary colors scream for your attention. The typography is bold and blocky. The mascots are smiling aggressively. But beyond the aesthetics, the materials are heavier. Plastic is beginning to make its way in, but glass and metal are still the kings of the shelf. When you pick up a bottle of Coca-Cola or bleach, it has heft. If you drop a shopping bag in 1960, it doesn't just rip, it shatters. The sound of breaking glass is a common interruption in the store, followed immediately by the "clean up on aisle 4" announcement over a crackling PA system. This reliance on glass also means the deposit system is in full swing. You don't just throw bottles away, you collect them, wash them, and bring them back to the store in wooden crates to get your 2 cents back. It is a cycle of return and reuse that we abandoned for convenience, only to realize decades later how smart it actually was. If you are fascinated by these lost details of the past and want to uncover more hidden histories of how we used to live, please take a second to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps us keep digging into these archives to bring you more stories like this one. Now look at what is actually inside those colorful boxes. The 1960s shopper is obsessed with the concept of convenience. The war is over, the economy is booming, and technology is promising a life of leisure. This means that anything instant is seen as a miracle. You see shelves stocked with instant mashed potatoes, instant coffee, and the rising star of the decade, Tang. The fact that these foods are heavily processed isn't seen as a negative. It is a badge of scientific progress. To eat something that came out of a laboratory is to be modern. You see TV dinners in aluminum trays featuring Salisbury steak and compartmentalized peas, selling the dream that you no longer need to spend hours over a hot stove. The freezer section, an open-top coffin-style cooler that radiates cold air up to your waist, is filled with these blocks of ice-encrusted convenience. However, despite this rush toward the artificial, there is a paradox in the produce and meat departments. While the center aisles are becoming a factory of preservatives, the perimeter of the store is still deeply manual and human. There are no bags of pre-washed salad mix. If you want lettuce, you are buying a head of iceberg that still has dirt in the crevices. You have to weigh your own vegetables on a hanging spring scale that swings wildly as you drop onions into the metal basket. And the meat department. It is a theater. You don't just pick up a styrofoam tray wrapped in plastic. Often you can see the butchers through a glass window, sawing through bone and fat. You ring a bell, and a man in a blood-stained apron comes out to talk to you. You ask for a specific cut, and he wraps it in pink or white butcher paper, tying it with string or sealing it with a singular piece of masking tape. The transaction is personal. You trust the meat because you can see the man who cut it. This tension between the personal connection of the butcher and the impersonal, mass-produced nature of the canned goods creates a unique psychological environment. You are walking through a transition period in history. On one hand, you have the trust of the old world, where the grocer knew your name. On the other hand, you have the anonymity of the modern supermarket, a vast warehouse where you are just one of hundreds of customers flowing through the aisles. This anonymity is thrilling, but it also introduces a new problem that store owners in 1960 were frantically trying to solve. With so much merchandise sitting out in the open, and with prices just stamped in smudgeable ink, the system was incredibly vulnerable. What was stopping someone from simply licking their thumb and rubbing off the price, or slipping a small item into the deep pockets of a trench coat? As you turn your heavy cart toward the checkout lanes, you are about to enter the high-stakes zone of the 1960s grocery run, where the battle for profit wasn't fought with security cameras, but with the sharp eyes of a cashier who had to know the price of everything, and the trust that you, the customer, were playing by the rules. The checkout lane in 1960 is not a place of passive waiting. It is a high-pressure zone of mechanical performance and social scrutiny. As you push your heavy chrome cart into the narrow channel between the counters, you are entering the domain of the checker, a woman who commands her station with the authority of a pilot in a cockpit. There is no conveyor belt moving your items toward her automatically. Instead, you have to unload your cart onto a stationary counter, pushing the cans and boxes forward with a wooden divider bar, or in some stores, placing them onto a large, rotating turntable that spins slowly, bringing your groceries to her waiting hands. This creates a physical rhythm to the end of your shopping trip, a manual labor that you share with the employee, but the real marvel, the centerpiece of this entire operation, is the machine she is operating. It is a national cash register, a beige or olive green metal beast that weighs as much as a small engine block. It doesn't hum with electricity, it vibrates with mechanical tension. Watch her hands. This is where the absence of the barcode becomes a display of sheer human skill. The checker doesn't slide items over a scanner. She grabs a can of corn with her left hand, rotates it instantly to find the purple ink stamp on the lid, and with her right hand, she strikes the keys of the register. This is not a gentle tap. These keys have long travel and heavy springs. She has to punch them with conviction. Chunk, chunk, ding. She enters 19 for 19 cents, then hits the department key, grocery, and the machine registers the entry with a mechanical crunch. She does this for every single item in your cart. If you have 50 items, she is performing hundreds of keystrokes, all from memory or by visually deciphering that smudged ink we talked about earlier. She is a pianist of commerce, playing a song of inflation and consumption, and she is doing it incredibly fast. But here is where the complexity of the 1960s system reveals itself. What happens when the stock boy stamp is illegible? What happens when the purple ink has smeared into a violet blur? In the modern world, the machine simply refuses to beep, and we wait for an attendant. In 1960, the system relies on knowledge. The checker pauses, holding a jar of pickles aloft like Hamlet holding a skull. She shouts over her shoulder, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the store. Price on Vlasic dills? Somewhere in the back, a manager or a stock boy hears the call and shouts back, 39. The transaction continues. It is a communal vocal system. There is no database to query. The database is the collective memory of the staff. This means that if the price changed that morning and the stock boy forgot to tell the checker, you might get charged the old price or the new one, depending on who remembers what. The price is fluid, negotiated in real time by human error and human memory. Once the tally is complete and the heavy drawer shoots open with a bell ring that signals the end of the calculation, you face the ritual of payment. In 1960, the credit card is a rarity, a novelty reserved for travel and entertainment, certainly not for the weekly grocery run. You are paying with cash, peeling bills from a leather wallet, or you are engaging in the slow, deliberate ceremony of writing a personal check. This is a moment of tension that has largely evaporated from modern life. You pull out your checkbook, uncap your fountain pen or click your ballpoint, and begin to write in cursive on the small paper rectangle. The checker watches you. She might ask for identification, perhaps a driver's license, which she notes on the top of the check. But often, if you are a regular, she just takes it. However, lurking behind her, taped to the register or pinned to a corkboard, is the bad checklist. It is a public wall of shame, a list of names of neighbors who bounced a payment. The fear of ending up on that list, of having your financial insolvency broadcast to the entire neighborhood, is a more powerful deterrent than any credit score algorithm. But wait, the transaction isn't over just because you paid. Now comes the most addictive, brilliant, and insidious loyalty program ever devised. S&H Green Stamps. This is the mid-century equivalent of Bitcoin for housewives. For every dime you spend, the checker dispenses a long perforated strip of green stamps from a dispenser that sits next to the register. These aren't digital points, they are physical currency. You take these strips, which taste faintly of bitter mint glue, and you are expected to take them home and paste them into a saver's book. This is the gamification of the 1960s economy. The goal is to fill enough books to visit the Redemption Center, a magical store where you can't spend money, only stamps. You save for months to get a toaster, a lawn chair, or a set of luggage. The checker handing you those stamps is validating your effort. It turns the chore of spending money into a treasure hunt, a psychological hook that keeps you loyal to the store, not because the prices are lower, but because you are only 3 books away from that new electric mixer. However, as you stand there waiting for your stamps and your change, a darker reality of this high-trust era begins to surface. We tend to romanticize the 1960s as a time of innocence, where people didn't lock their doors and honesty was the default setting, but the design of the checkout lane tells a different story. The reason the checker has to physically handle every item isn't just because there are no scanners. It is because she is the primary line of defense against a rampant, low-tech form of theft that was plaguing the industry. This is the midpoint revelation that changes how you view this nostalgic scene. The lack of technology didn't make people more honest. It made them more creative criminals, and the store knew it. Without barcodes, the price of an item was defined solely by the sticker or the stamp on it. This created a massive vulnerability known as ticket switching. A savvy, dishonest shopper could bring a razor blade or a damp sponge into the store. They would find a cheap can of store-brand peas priced at 10 cents, peel off the sticker, and slap it onto a premium tin of imported ham priced at $2. Or they would use a solvent to wipe off the 59-cent stamp on a cosmetic item and use their own pocket stamp to mark it as 19 cents. Since the checker is relying on visual confirmation, if the sticker looks real, the price is real. The trust was a facade. The checker wasn't just ringing you up, she was investigating you. She was trained to look for loose corners on price tags, to notice if the ink shade of purple was slightly off, to realize that a ribeye steak shouldn't cost the same as ground chuck. This dynamic turns the checkout interaction into a subtle adversarial game. When she picks up that jar of fancy preserves and pauses, squinting at the lid, your heart rate spikes. Is she just reading the price? Or has she caught on to the fact that the sticker is slightly askew? The store managers installed mirrors on the ceiling, convex domes that distorted the aisle, not just to spot shoplifters pocketing candy, but to watch the customers' hands as they manipulated the merchandise. And then there was the bottom of the basket trick, or bob. Without a sensor to beep when you walked out, people would simply leave massive items, sacks of dog food, cases of soda, on the bottom rack of the cart and walk right past the cashier. The checker had to physically lean over the counter, craning her neck to inspect the undercarriage of your cart. If she missed it, you got it for free. So, as the bag boy, a teenager with a crisp crew cut and a bow tie, begins to load your groceries into stiff, brown paper sacks, understanding the structural engineering required to not crush the eggs, you realize that you have just survived a gauntlet. You haven't just bought food, you have navigated a complex social contract built on manual verification, psychological pressure, and the physical manipulation of currency and stamps. The absence of the barcode didn't mean the system was simpler. It meant the system was human, and humans are prone to error, manipulation, and judgment. As the bag boy asks, "Carry out for you, ma'am," offering to push your cart to the car in the vast asphalt heat of the parking lot, you accept. Not just for the service, but because in 1960, the transaction isn't fully closed until the goods are safely in the trunk of your station wagon. But even as you drive away, the industry is already plotting to eliminate the human element that just served you, because the cost of all that trust is becoming too high to bear. The parking lot of the 1960s supermarket is more than just a slab of asphalt. It is the final stage of the consumer performance, a place where the boundaries between the store's control and the customer's freedom begin to blur. As you follow the bag boy, let's call him Jimmy, out through the automatic doors, the conditioned air gives way to the humid reality of the afternoon. Jimmy is pushing your cart, a service that is standard, expected, and completely free of charge. This is the carry-out culture, a relic of an era where service was the primary differentiator between stores. He is navigating the cart through a sea of massive tail-finned automobiles, Ford Galaxies, Chevrolet Impalas, and Plymouth Furies. These cars are land yachts, painted in pastel shades of turquoise, cream, and coral, taking up spaces that would fit two modern compact cars. When you reach your station wagon, perhaps a woody-sided Ford Country Squire, the loading process is a ritual in itself. There is no popping the trunk with a remote key fob. You have to physically unlock the rear gate, crank down the rear window, and drop the tailgate with a heavy, metallic clunk. Jimmy lifts the brown paper bags, hugging them to his chest to support the bottom, and arranges them in the back like a game of Tetris. He is careful. If the milk bottle breaks or the eggs crack before you leave the lot, it is on the store to replace them. This liability extends to the very edge of the property. Once the trunk is slammed shut, you might tip him a quarter, a significant sum for a teenager in 1960, and he will touch the brim of his paper hat, smile, and hustle back to the store to help the next lady. It is a scene of perfect choreographed civility. But as you sit behind the enormous steering wheel, turning the key in the ignition and feeling the V8 engine rumble to life, a silent revolution is brewing back inside the store office, hidden behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The store manager is sitting at a metal desk, surrounded by carbon copy invoices and a haze of cigarette smoke, staring at a ledger that tells a terrifying story. The trust system, the manual entry, the purple stamps, the human checkers, it is all bleeding money. The 1960s are often remembered as a boom time, but for the grocery industry, it was a time of razor-thin margins and escalating chaos. As stores got bigger, moving from 10,000 square feet to 30,000 square feet, the sheer volume of inventory was becoming impossible to track with human brains alone. Consider the inventory problem. In a world without computers, how does the store know when to order more tomato soup? They don't know instantly. They only know when a stock boy walks down aisle 4, looks at the shelf, and sees a gap. This is eyeball inventory, and it is disastrously inefficient. If the stock boy is lazy or distracted or sick, the shelf stays empty. An empty shelf means a lost sale. But worse than the empty shelf is the shrink. Shrink is the industry term for lost inventory, theft, spoilage, and paperwork errors. In 1960, shrink is rampant. Between the ticket-switching customers, the sweethearting cashiers who slide free steaks to their friends, and the delivery drivers who short the backdoor deliveries, the store is leaking profit from 1,000 tiny holes. The manager knows that for every dollar that goes into the register, pennies are vanishing into the ether of inefficiency. This pressure cooker of financial anxiety drives the industry to experiment with wild, futuristic ideas that sound like science fiction. While you are driving home with your groceries, engineers in labs at RCA, IBM, and Philco are frantic. They know that the grocery store is the holy grail of automation. If they can solve the checkout problem, they can change the world. But in the 1960s, the technology just isn't ready, leading to some bizarre and fascinating failures that paved the way for the future. One of the most ambitious attempts to kill the checkout line in the mid-century was the keydoozle. Although technically birthed in the late 40s, its influence and the ghost of its failure haunted the 60s innovation mindset. Imagine a store where you don't pick up items at all. Instead, you walk through a showroom where single samples of goods are displayed behind glass, like artifacts in a museum. You carry a special key, a punch card device. When you want a box of cereal, you insert your key into a slot next to the glass and press a button. Click. The key records your choice on a paper tape. You do this for your entire list. When you are done, you bring your key to the front desk. The cashier inserts it into a master reader, and in the back room, a hidden warehouse of mechanical chutes and conveyor belts, machines automatically drop your items onto a belt that whisks them to the front, all while calculating your total. It was a vending machine the size of a building. It was brilliant. It was the future. And it failed spectacularly because the mechanical chutes kept jamming, crushing the eggs and exploding the soda bottles before they ever reached the customer. It was a lesson that the 1960s took to heart. Mechanical automation was too violent for groceries. They needed something optical. They needed light. This leads to the desperate search for a universal code. By the mid-60s, the industry leaders are holding secret meetings. They are tired of the purple ink. They are tired of the price check on aisle 5. They want a language that a machine can read. But lasers are still massive, dangerous, and incredibly expensive laboratory instruments, not something you put next to a teenage cashier. So, they experiment with simpler things. They try fluorescent stickers that glow under UV light. They try magnetic ink, like the kind on the bottom of checks. There is a frantic energy to these experiments, a sense that the dam is about to break. The grocery store of 1960 is a system at its breaking point, stretched to the absolute limit of what manual labor can achieve. Back in your kitchen, you are unloading the bags. The experience of putting away groceries in the 60s has its own sensory palette. You are stacking cans of Spam, putting the frozen orange juice concentrate into the icebox, and pouring the milk into a pitcher because the wax paper carton is tricky to pour from once opened. As you perform these domestic tasks, you are completely unaware that you are the last generation to shop this way. You are the last generation to know the price of bread by heart, the last to trust a human to calculate your total, the last to interact with a food system that relies on physical stamps and mental math. The trust you felt in the store was real, but it was fragile. It was based on a community scale that was rapidly disappearing as suburbs exploded and strangers became neighbors. The tension builds here because the very thing that made the 1960s grocery experience so human, the chatty butcher, the memory-reliant cashier, the bag boy who knew your car, was the very thing that was killing the business model. The human element was the bottleneck. The midpoint twist we discussed earlier, that the lack of technology enabled theft, is now evolving into a systemic crisis. It wasn't just about theft anymore, it was about speed. The American population was growing, the stores were getting crowded, and the lines were getting too long. The K-chunk of the manual register was too slow for the pace of the jet age. As you fold the brown paper bags to save them, because you never throw away a good bag in 1960, you are unknowingly standing on the precipice of a digital revolution. The barcode is coming. It is currently just a sketch in the sand, a bullseye pattern drawn by 2 graduate students on a beach in Miami. A true story we will touch on, but it is destined to wipe away the world you just shopped in. It will silence the shouting of prices. It will eliminate the purple ink. It will turn the cashier from a skilled typist into a passive scanner. But before that happens, there is one final, glorious and chaotic chapter of the pre-digital supermarket to explore. A chapter where the industry tries one last, desperate attempt to solve their problems without computers, leading to a psychological experiment on shoppers that changed how we buy food forever. The trust was about to be replaced by psychology, and the store layout itself was weaponized to make you buy more, faster, without you ever realizing you were being manipulated. This is the final piece of the puzzle, how the 1960s store design was actually a sophisticated trap designed to keep you walking, looking, and spending, all while you thought you were just picking up dinner. The sun is setting on the 1960s, casting long golden shadows across the polished linoleum floors of the supermarket. We have walked the aisles, heard the mechanical symphony of the cash registers, and felt the weight of the glass bottles in our hands. But to truly understand the legacy of this era, we have to look at the invisible architecture that was being built around the shopper, a psychological blueprint that still controls us today. While the engineers were failing to build mechanical robots to pick groceries, a different kind of expert was quietly taking over the store, the behavioral psychologist. If they couldn't automate the checkout yet, they would automate you. In the absence of data, the 1960s store managers became masters of intuition and manipulation. They realized that since they couldn't track every item with a computer, they had to control the flow of the human being. This is the birth of the racetrack layout, a design strategy that reached its peak in this decade. Notice how, when you walk into a 1960s store, you are almost always forced to turn right. This isn't an accident. Studies showed that people naturally veer right. So they placed the highest margin items, the produce, right at the entrance. The bright colors of the oranges, the deep greens of the peppers, the meticulously stacked pyramids of apples, these weren't just food, they were a sensory primer. They made you feel fresh, healthy, and optimistic. Once you had good, healthy items in your cart, your psychological defenses lowered, and you felt justified in buying the sugary, processed snacks waiting for you in the inner aisles. It was a physical hack of the human conscience, but the manipulation went deeper. Without the barcode to provide sales data, stores used end caps, the displays at the end of the aisles, as testing grounds. In 1960, an end cap display of Coca-Cola wasn't just there to look pretty, it was a trap. They would build massive towers of soda cases, sometimes hundreds of them, creating a wall of product. The sheer volume signaled to the shopper, this must be a deal. Look how much there is. Even if the price hadn't dropped a single cent, the abundance triggered a scarcity mindset in reverse. You bought it because everyone else seemed to be buying it. They also discovered the power of eye level is buy level. In a world where you had to physically read the price stamp on the can, placement was everything. The brands that paid the most got the shelf at eye level. The generic, cheaper brands were relegated to the stoop or stretch zones, the very bottom or the very top shelves. You had to physically work to save money. This era also perfected the art of the loss leader. This is the secret weapon of the 1960s circular, the printed flyer that arrived in your mailbox every week. The store would advertise chickens or coffee at a price that was actually lower than what the store paid for them. They were losing money on every chicken sold. Why? To get you in the door. Because they knew with absolute certainty that once you were inside, pushing that heavy chrome cart, the trust environment would take over. You would assume that if the chicken was cheap, the milk was cheap, and the cereal was cheap. You would fill your cart with high-profit items, subsidizing that cheap chicken 10 times over. It was a confidence game played on a neighborhood scale. As we reach the end of our journey through the 1960s supermarket, the emotional weight of what we have lost begins to settle in. We have gained incredible convenience. We can scan our own items, we can order delivery from an app, and we have access to food from every corner of the globe. But we have lost the texture of the experience. The 1960s grocery run was a sensory event. It was the smell of grinding coffee beans, not from a pod, but from a bag you poured into a machine in the aisle. It was the sound of the butcher's saw. It was the taste of the free cookie the baker gave your child. It was the feeling of the heavy paper bag in your arms. It was a world that demanded your attention, your physical presence, and yes, your trust. The barcode, when it finally arrived in widespread use in the late 70s and early 80s, didn't just change the price tag, it sanitized the entire experience. It turned the cashier into a silent operator. It turned the stock boy into a logistics worker. It turned the price into a digital ghost, easily changed by a computer in a back room without a drop of purple ink or a smudge of solvent. The beep replaced the ka-chunk, and with that sound, the friction of the transaction disappeared. We stopped looking at the prices on the cans because there were no prices on the cans. We stopped knowing the math in our heads. We surrendered our awareness to the machine. There is a profound melancholy in realizing that the inefficiency of the 1960s was actually where the humanity lived. The slow checkout line was where you talked to your neighbor about the high school football game. The manual weighing of vegetables was where you learned to pick a good melon. The negotiation over a smudged price stamp was a moment of human contact. The store was a community hub, a place where the chaotic, messy business of feeding a family was a shared, public ritual. Today, we wear noise-canceling headphones and use self-checkout to avoid eye contact. We have optimized the process, but we have hollowed out the soul of the marketplace. So, the next time you are in a modern supermarket, standing in the glowing light of a self-checkout kiosk, listening to the robotic voice tell you to place item in the bagging area, close your eyes for just a second. Try to hear the ghost of the 1960s. Listen for the heavy rattle of a steel cart. Smell the floor wax and the fresh ground coffee. Imagine a world where the price is stamped in purple ink, where the cashier knows the cost of butter by heart, and where the system works not because of lasers and algorithms, but because of a fragile, beautiful, and complicated web of human trust. It was a harder way to shop, a slower way to live, but it was real in a way that is becoming harder and harder to find. We are dedicated to preserving these stories, to digging up the lost sounds and feelings of the past before they fade away completely. There are so many more chapters of history that are hidden in the mundane details of everyday life, from the way we used to pump gas to the lost art of the department store elevator operator. If you want to come with us on these journeys, if you want to keep uncovering the hidden layers of the world we left behind, then please, right now, click that subscribe button. Leave a like if this story transported you back in time, even for a moment. By subscribing, you ensure that these memories don't just disappear into the static of history. Join us and let's keep the past alive together.